the Christ. In the same gospel, it is also stated that Jesus said to his disciples, "Whom say ye that I am?" And Simon Peter answered and said, "Thou art the Christ." Then charged his disciples that they should tell no man that he was Jesus, the Christ. In Greek, it was Christos. Hindu, it is Krishna, and it means the anointed. Now, the word Christ was used very liberally at that time for great potentates. Cyrus, the king of Persia, was called the Christ. Mithras of Persia was also known as the Christ. Heru, or Horus, was known as the Christ. Bel Minor was known as the Christ. Io was known as the Christ. Adonai was known as the Christ. Each of them was called the Anointed One, or the Christ. The title of the Christ, or the Anointed One, was applied even at the time to the King of Israel. The title of the Christ was applied to religious teachers, teachers of factions, necromancers, wonder workers, and even the magicians of the time were called the Christ. This common usage was shown in the Gospels themselves. Look at Matthew 24, 23, and 24. Look at Deuteronomy 13 and 1. Then if any man shall say unto you, Lo, here is Christ, or there, believe it not. For there shall arise false Christs. Deuteronomy 13 and 1. There shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect. False Christs tells you that the word Christs was used a hell of a lot more than we believe it was used. These statements show that the Christ was a title only. Therefore, it is a title. As a title, it cannot be a name. Thus, this is strong evidence that all passages in the New Testament which contains the word Christ as a name exposes the hand of the early Christian forgers at work, as he interweaved into the Pauline epistles certain spurious words and passages to fabricate evidence in an attempt to give validity and existence to a person that was completely unknown to history. It was only by devious customs and habits extended over thousands of years' time that the title the Christ gradually mutated into a name, and Jesus Christ, or later still Christ Jesus, became one designation. The name Jesus is a Latin transliteralization of the Greek Iesus, I-E-S-O-U-S, which in turn is transliterated from the Hebrew Yeshua, Yeshua, or Joshua, meaning Jehovah is salvation. In one form or another, this name appears throughout the Old Testament. During the Hellenic period of Rome, the name Jesus wasn't well received by the Jews because they saw it as a bastardization of Yeshua or Joshua. So many people with the same name Jesus adopted the purely Greek analog Jason. And this name appears in this form in the New Testament as well. Acts 17 and 5. Huh? Acts 17 and 5. Jason is another word for Jesus. Jason and the Argonauts. How many Argonauts were there? 12. Huh? And go to Romans 16 and 21 as well. After the so-called captivity, the name is seen frequently and is interchanged frequently with Jehoshua, the successor of Moses, who is called Jesus more than once in the New Testament. Look at Acts 7 and 45. Later on, the name Jesus became one of the commonest Jewish names appearing in the New Testament. See Acts 13 and 6, see Acts 18 and 7, and see Colossians 4 and 11. The name Bar-Abbas is also Jesus, although it was deleted from the chief manuscripts by the Christian fathers, specifically Origen, who was careful to see that no sinner among these had borne the name of their Jesus the Christ. And you could read this in the Encyclopedia Britannica, 9th edition, volume 13, page 656. T.W. Dewan, in his book, Bible Myths, writes, "We know of a Jesus son of Sirach, a writer of Proverbs, whose collection is preserved among the apocryphal books of the Old Testament. The notorious Barabbas, son of Abbas, was himself called Jesus. Among Paul's opponents, we find a magician called Elymas, the son of Jesus. Among the Christians, a certain Jesus, also called Justus, is known and written about. Josephus mentions more than 10 different distinct persons, priests, robbers, peasants, lowlives, and others, who bore the name Jesus, all of whom lived during the last century of the Jewish state. Who is this Jesus that you got hanging on the cross and you genuflect to every Sunday? The evidence appears very distinct and plain that Jesus the Christ of the four Gospels was unknown to Paul. The life story of Jesus the Christ of the four Gospels was not invented and written until 4 generations after the death of Paul. That is the only explanation that can be offered for the fact that Paul makes absolutely no references to the teachings and miracles of Jesus the Christ of the four Gospels. In fact, there is no proof that Paul himself actually lived. The Encyclopedia Biblica, listen, the Encyclopedia Biblica states, it is true that the picture of Paul drawn by later times differs utterly in more or fewer of its details from the original legend has made itself master of this person. The simple truth has been mixed up with invention. Paul has become the hero of an admiring band of the more highly developed Christians. Now, Marshall J. Gauvin, Gauvin, wrote a book called Did Jesus Really Live? And on page 58, he says, check it out. Now, this is from the Encyclopedia Biblica. He took it from here. The Christian authority admits that invention has done its work in manufacturing at least part of the life of Paul, the earliest Christian writer. In truth, the ablest Christian authors and scholars reject all but 4 of the Pauline epistles as being spurious. Listen carefully, people. This is in the Encyclopedia Biblica. They reject all but 4 of the epistles as being spurious. Some maintain that Paul was not the author of any of them. The very existence of Paul is questionable. Give me a chance to get my Now let's talk about the crucifixion, because all you folks just love to talk about how he died on the cross for us. Yep. Let's talk about all this stuff about the crucifixion. Okay. The 16 Crucified Saviors. Have you read that book? He knows it. Dr. Kersey Graves. Page 129 and 130. Dr. Kersey Graves states, we find that there has always been a margin for doubt amongst his own followers as to the fact that the crucifixion of Jesus Christ, and this in the very country and era of its occurrence. Many of the early Christians and contemporary Jews and Gentiles doubted it, and some openly disputed that it ever occurred. Others bestowed upon it the mere spiritual signification, and not a few considered it merely symbolical of a holy life. One circumstance calculated to lead to the entire discredit of the story of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ is the revelation in connection to it, a violent convulsion of nature and the resurrection of long-buried saints. Events not supported by any authentic contemporaneous history, sacred or profane. As these events must be set down as fabulous, they leave the mind in doubt. Listen to what he says. They leave the mind in doubt with respect to the fact of the crucifixion itself.